Maybe it's just recency bias, but to me, this was the most bonkers January in the history of Ohio State football. But we are in the final 1, 2, 3 days of the month, which is perfect timing for a Three Thoughts Thursday and for a little bit of a recap on the beat presented by the Waterworks. So he's Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. And it's not over, so I know it could still potentially get crazier, Birm. But since we've been covering Ohio State football, I just can't remember anything like it. And by the way, last January was pretty crazy because they won a national championship.
Yeah, barring like something catastrophic, I don't know what could happen that would like make this month crazier, because the stretch of days between January 1st, when we both
January 1, Cortez Hankton was hired on January 1st.
When we both arrived back to our homes from the trip to Dallas to last Saturday. So what would that be? The 24th was among the most news heavy, just chaotic, watching Ohio State scramble, trying to figure out on the fly what they were going to do with their roster, with the transfer portal, bringing in guys who people expected them, how much money they can spend. How do you know how much money you can spend if you don't know who's returning and who's going to the NFL? Like the 30 guys entering the transfer portal, and not just 30 players that you look at and say, well, you should expect that. But players like Quincy Porter, players like Aaron Scott, players like Jarquez Carter, that you're like, wow, everything Ohio State is saying, everything we're hearing about fundamental shifts in philosophy is actually being applied in real time. And so in a normal year, it's been like, well, okay, we think this may happen over the next few months. But this was like immediate. Yeah. And it started again, like day one of the year with the Cortez Hankton hiring. But even that was done in such a way that it had been mentioned that he interviewed 2.5 weeks earlier. And then there was nothing. There was no conversation. And I think I understand it. Ohio State was trying to win a national championship. They were getting ready for the playoffs. They're trying to figure out how to manipulate the coaching staff with Brian Hartline leaving, and who's going to do what and how much responsibility everyone's going to have for the playoff game against Miami. And no conversation about Hankton. And then, I mean, we're leaving the hotel on New Year's morning at 11 a.m. when the news happens. Ohio State had been back in Columbus for like 6 hours at that point. Right. And we're already seeing Ryan Day make news and make moves, and it continued all the way through last week with the hiring of Arthur Smith. It's been a wild January.
There's no way to definitively or even accurately answer this question, but I'm going to do it anyway. Do you think there will be any adjustment to the calendar in this offseason? A lot of the coaches have mentioned this. You talk about the AFCA proposals that they want put in place by the Rules Committee, which apparently there is still a committee looking at rules. I don't know who's actually enforcing them when they go beyond that. But
it's fun to look at them, but just to doing anything about them is totally different.
The one area where they seem to be willing to make changes, often to the deterrent and to or to become a
detriment,
an annoyance. Yes, a detriment and an annoyance to the actual college football coaching staffs across the country, is that they will change the calendar on a whim. I kind of think that doing it all at once and then being done in the middle of January is probably preferable to some of the way they've structured it in the past. So do you think they will make more changes, and what could they even do at this point that would improve it in your mind?
I mean, that has to be the change. I don't know how it gets there. I've heard many people talk about many things and different adjustments and alignment to schedules and making sure you're done by the 10th of January. Like, it has to happen. I don't know when. You know, there are these two converging things, like the eventual CBA that's going to happen with college football players, like it's going to have to occur, and the eventual calendar change, so that you actually have an off-season roster build moment where everything has to happen at once. And I just don't know how it can continue the way it's going in this current path. It's Ohio State was benefited by losing when they lost, because they had an opportunity to get back and settle. But obviously you'd rather be competing and win the national championship, but
that seems better.
Yeah, that is better. But the fact is, we're seeing a shift in the schedule. Ohio State with the one off week this coming season. I think that will be back to the standard around the country. I don't think we'll see the expanding schedule. But again, we talked about it already last week. next year's college football championship game is on the 27th of January. Like it's only getting later. So until the schools either stop pretending that they are actually interested in students being students, or they shift the school calendar back a month, like there just has to be a carved out schedule in January where signing day, transfer portal, college decisions, all that stuff have to be made at once. It's just reckless the way it is now. But I don't know that you're never going to get full agreement, because schools like Ohio State have a much different priority than schools like Toledo. I mean, and that extends to far beyond just roster building. It's involving everything. Right now, there are people trying to change the way that recruiting is done from the assistant standpoint. So, I mean, we've seen it. Ohio State did it last year when they were in the playoff run. They didn't send their coaches out in December and January. They sent their personnel staff out on the road in December and January. I think that you are going to see programs like Ohio State, programs of that ilk, start to push that during the season. No assistants go out during the season. So, so you send out only your personnel staff. But again, a MAC school doesn't have a personnel staff that's big enough to go send out on the road for 6 weeks. So, like, how do you find something that fits the overall scope of college football and the difference between major programs and mid-major programs and small programs? Like, it's not the same sport as the NFL, because everyone in the NFL is the same. Like that. So until we abandon the entire structure of college football and 134 teams and all that stuff, or we fully acknowledge that there is a split between the Power Four and everyone else, and the Power Four is constructed in a way that's more similar to the NFL, like no one's ever going to be fully on board. So someone's always going to be pissed off.
I think that's an interesting point about sending coaches on the road during the season, because if you look at Ohio State's schedule this year compared to last year, if you had the two off dates, and we know that Ohio State did this, like half of the staff went out for one and half went out for the other, to allocate their dates out. Well, if you only have one of those and you are sandwiching that off week between playing at Indiana and at USC, you are not going to sacrifice any of that preparation the one time that you have a chance to regroup in the midst of your two most challenging road trips. So,
especially because that week happening on the second to last week of October means that's the week you're doing all your self scouting to see what your tendencies were through the season, but then all of your roster conversations, all of your preliminary NIL negotiations, all of your preliminary, hey, where is my future? Like all that is happening right then, because 5 weeks later, after you play USC and Oregon and Michigan and maybe Indiana or Oregon or Michigan again in the Big Ten championship game, like that's when you're supposed to have those conversations. This is just ludicrous to expect that teams are supposed to keep up this way. And so, we're seeing Ohio State, and we haven't really even dove into the Three Thoughts Thursday yet, but like one of the things, like you saw Ohio State just hire an offensive coordinator that has no intention of the Buckeyes sending him on the road ever as a recruiter, because he is not technically one of the 10 countable coaches. But as Ryan Day's out on the road and Matt Patricia's out on the road and all these guys are out on the road now, like in the next couple of months, I think that you will see Ohio State maybe even shift further away from that and saying, hey, Matt Patricia doesn't need to go on the road. Let's send Miguel Patrick on the road instead. Because So maybe there's a way that these coaches or the schools get to designate during different times of the year but again, all of these things are kind of chaotic, and until there's a standardized path and plan among college football top to bottom, like there's always going to be bickering. There's always going to be arguing. There's always going to be somebody who feels like their team and their program is being screwed. And you're not going to get a lot of people crying for Ohio State or teams of that level, but those are the teams that bring in the money. Those are the teams that people watch, and so those are the teams you have to listen to. But as we've seen when it came to the early signing periods, the changing schedules for that, like it's not actually being football people who are getting to make these changes. They're just being made randomly by people who have no real input into what the coaches or the personnel staffs are dealing with. And it sort of just leads to people being pissed off all the time.
Well, yeah, like you said, nobody's going to ever feel sympathy for Ohio State, which just went out last weekend and hired a former NFL head coach to be its offensive coordinator as it expanded the size and scope and power of that coaching staff. We've talked about Arthur Smith all week long. So let's exclude him from this thought, which is what you think it was the actual best move that Ohio State has made in January.
I mean, it's hard not to put him at that list because...
Well, I know that's why we've got to remove him, because then we would just be agreeing and talking about it again.
I think the best move Ohio State made in February was identifying Terry Moore and Earl Little as their guys at safety and doing it in a way that afforded no drama. Those players both visited completely under the radar. It wasn't one of those things where their agents were out there spilling the tea that they were on campus trying to drive up their NIL contracts or anything like that. They both showed up. They both committed. They both signed before they left campus. And Ohio State knew that 2 weeks before. So like they knew that as they were leaving Dallas, it was the day that Cortez Hankton is being announced. Those players were in the Ohio State crosshairs as those are our guys. And while it led to people having some concerns and questions regarding the departure of Fahim Delane, like for the Ohio State defense, which is still a safety-driven defense ostensibly, Matt Patricia's focus is a little different to Jim Knowles, but the safeties are still what eventually will make this defense be a success or not, because they afford you so many other opportunities and flexibility. Having those two in the sights, locked in, no drama, to me is the biggest move of January, because if you hope to have any sort of continuity, and this will lead probably into one of our other conversations today on the show, if you want to make sure that Matt Patricia has everything he needs at Ohio State, then that's how you do it, because you don't leave wiggle room. And there are plenty of Ohio State fans who are mad about the way the Chaz Coleman thing went, or other players at Ohio State tried to get in on that they didn't for whatever reason.
There really weren't that. I mean,
there weren't. And that's the thing. But we as people tend to focus on the negatives. That's just the way people are. But that safety situation was a positive from the start. And Ohio State had a plan and they executed it perfectly. So that was, I think, the most important thing from a personnel standpoint.
Can you, from your knowledge of the situation, like out of actual swings that Ohio State took that they could be legitimately disappointed in, does it actually go much further than Chaz Coleman and Kayan Lee at corner? Like I'm trying to think. I know that there were other people that took visits. There were other positions that were of need for Ohio State. Some, I think the Desir twins at Florida State, like that really wasn't an option for them. Like, I don't feel like they didn't get to 3 strikes and you're out, like maybe 2. Do you think it's that much different than I'm viewing it as?
No, I think the biggest thing was that there were players that they thought would get in the portal that didn't. And again, the Desir twins, the Florida State kids are a prime example of that. There are other players around the country that, they were in a position to make a move for if that player entered the portal. If something different would have happened with Bo Jackson, for example, I think you would have seen Ohio State be a much more aggressive version of itself for running back. There were, as far as guys that visited campus that didn't end up at Ohio State, certainly Kayan Lee and Chaz Coleman are the two that will stand out. But they really wanted Jackson Harris, the wide receiver who ended up going to LSU from Hawaii. He was at the top of that list. But they felt like they got 2 really good options. And Devin McEwen, for example, was not we couldn't get Jackson Harris, so let's go after this guy. Like that was we want 2. And then you were fortunate enough to be able to pivot Cortez Hankton's relationship with, the Florida, the LSU receiver whose last name was Kyle Parker. I was going to call him Kyle Jackson for some reason. Kayan Lee was one that, I don't know. It's weird because Ohio State, I think more than anybody, has done a really good job like maintaining relationships with players that they recruited out of high school, and Kayan Lee and Chaz Coleman are 2 of those. So you think that when a player like that comes back and you like get an opportunity to rekindle the relationship or save it from the first time around when Auburn bought him out on signing day, you think, well, no, this will be easy, but that's just not the case. Like the people are who they are. But yeah, I mean, I don't know who else they missed on. So, you certainly could understand why people would want them to go after higher profile guys. If you're a believer that at 3 years into someone's college career, their high school rankings still matter, which I don't believe that. But other than that, like who did they miss on? And it's not like they didn't replace Kayan Lee with a better upside, longer opportunity with Dominic Kelly, and an Ohio kid in Cam Calhoun who is from Winton Woods and a player that, they had a relationship with, a guy who's close with Jermaine Matthews, a guy who maybe a year from now, bringing in Cam Calhoun from Winton Woods helps bring Justin Hill back home from Alabama. Like there's all these other, there's just so many moving parts now to the transfer portal and player retention and player acquisition that like, I don't think it can always be so viewed black and white, especially like Chaz Coleman's a prime example of that. He's not a guy that, when Ohio State made a fairly aggressive offer for him, but there was still a point when you're like, we have our questions, and until these questions are satisfied, how can we possibly promise more money to that when we have no answer? And then you have to figure out if Kenyatta Jackson's coming back, and he doesn't make that announcement till the day before the NFL draft deadline, or hell, he didn't make it till the day after.
He was after, yeah.
So like it's hard to speculate on what you have available when you don't have all the answers.
Yeah. And I realize that this is a matter of perspective and certainly perception skewed by the last two games. But I think the biggest moves that Ohio State made, and like, we didn't even spend that much time in the moment discussing Austin Saraveld's decision to come back, Carson Hinsman's decision to come back. Luke Montgomery posted that he was returning to Ohio State. I don't think that he was ready for the NFL draft, but it's not uncommon for people to use those posts to signify that they might have a new NIL deal in place contractually, or that they're committed to the future of the program. But I really believe that keeping this offensive line together is a huge deal. You don't want to have to be dipping into the transfer portal to stock your group up front, and finding players of the caliber of Saraveld, Hinsman, Montgomery, even what Phillip Daniels, who did come out of the transfer portal a year ago, finding them and paying them in the transfer portal is a crapshoot. It's incredibly difficult. In Ohio State, going 1 out of 2 with Phillip Daniels and Ethan Onyanwa a year ago is a reminder of that. So yes, I understand that there are some people out there that would include Jordan Seaton as like swing number 3 that Ohio State should have taken and did not. I think standing pat was actually a really, savvy move, probably a smart move, and probably one that I think is not getting enough credit for how it could pay off. Do they still all need to take like 10% steps improvement and get better next year? Pass protection, better run blocking, better scheme, better help from the talent around them. Yeah, I think that's fair. But it is so hard to get old and stay old on the offensive line. And I don't know that we spend enough time talking about what that means for Ohio State. I think that was the next row down from Arthur Smith, to me, was actually keeping the offensive line together.
Yeah, and I think it's a fair way to look at it. Like, was this group perfect? Of course they weren't. Were they better than people thought? I mean, I remember a Snap Judgments video early in the season where I said, I can't believe how much better this group is at pass protection than run protection, because I going into the season, I would have looked at it as a run heavy offensive line, and then they were significantly better in pass pro. That obviously was not the case in the last 2 games, as they got hit with a lot of shuffling around with injuries and trying to figure out a new right guard. But also it was stunts and movement up front and twists and also just talent that Indiana and Miami had that they didn't really play all year long after the Texas game. But if you are on the side of an Ohio State fan that says, well, Tyler Bowen was a disappointment, they should have moved on from him this offseason after 1 year, I think that's insane. That's just my opinion. But year 2, if you don't see that group make a 10% growth, if you don't see those guys get better, then that's, I think, a conversation that people can more appropriately have. So you have to build up front. That is the trenches are where the game is still being won. Ohio State learned that against Indiana and Miami. And so bringing those guys back and having 4 returning starters and having a spot for Ian Moore, who is heading into year 3 that you have a huge belief in, like, all those things are wildly important. So how do you move forward and say this group's going to get better, they're going to get healthier, and they're going to be the staple of this offense moving forward? If the offensive line brings back 4 guys and the offense brings back a Heisman Trophy candidate, and you have the best receiver on the planet, and you have a 1,000-yard rusher who might go down as one of the best running backs in Ohio State history statistically by the time his career is done, if you have all those things in place and your offense still looks inadequate against decent competition, and there's plenty of it on the schedule for Ohio State, then it's a fair conversation. But if those guys are what you think they are, then they will be the foundation of the offense, not everyone else, because we saw with all the other pieces in place how disjointed the offense could look when the offensive line wasn't right. So if they get where they need to be, I think that is what will lead Ohio State back to the playoffs. Is it has to be the offensive line. The other parts aren't changing.
Yeah, when you look back at January as a near hole at this point, what move wasn't made or needed to be made, should have been made, that's still a little bit of a concern for you?
I mean, I think it has to be, as we sit here on January 29th, that there's not an extension signed and finalized with Matthew Patricia, the defensive coordinator for Ohio State, who is certainly the guy they want to be the defensive coordinator. And it's getting like down to the wire. You have to wonder what the Raiders are waiting for to make a head coaching hire. So that makes you think that they're trying to find somebody either at Seattle or New England to be their guy, right? And Tom Brady's ties to New England certainly make the Patriots an interesting conversation, and not Josh McDaniel, who's already
going to see Josh McDaniels again.
Right, who's already failed in Las Vegas, but the relationship with Matt Patricia and Tom Brady still should have you feeling a little bit nervous still. But all signs for the last few weeks have pointed towards, as long as somebody doesn't make a Godfather type offer for Matt Patricia in the NFL, that he's going to be back at Ohio State. I hope, and maybe I'm just getting antsy or nervous on my own part of it, is that I hope Ohio State's not seeing this as a situation where they have an opportunity to get him for cheaper than they would otherwise, if that makes sense. Because I think that there is a philosophy at times in business and in contract negotiation where if someone else doesn't have a ironclad offer that forces you to pay them more money, that maybe you don't feel like you need to. And I think Ohio State could get proactive and save themselves some money down the road by giving Matt Patricia that contract we've been hearing about since November, which is make him the highest paid assistant in college football history and keep him on board as the head coach of the defense, the guy who develops James Laurinaitis into being the next defensive coordinator, the guy who develops James Laurinaitis and works with Larry Johnson and Tim Walton and all these, and Matt Carreri, who stuck around for another year to work with Matt Patricia. Like, I think that Ohio State, I hope that they're not seeing this as an opportunity to try and save a few bucks waiting for someone to give him an offer.
Yeah, these things are so.
Am I paranoid?
No, I don't. I mean, look, Tom Brady is taking the most active role in the Las Vegas hiring process. That's widely reported. I don't know that because I don't cover the NFL, but that's my understanding of the situation. And I know that the Raiders, when we first heard about 9 teams expressing some interest in Matt Patricia, that the Raiders were probably number 1 on that list because it's not that difficult for Tom Brady to get in touch with Matt Patricia or agents or back channel or whatever. Again, I'm not part of those conversations and I don't have any of their phones tapped. So I can't speak on that definitively. But the fact that it's the Raiders, the fact that there's probably going to be some form of New England influence, not just because of Tom Brady, but the way that they're building out that franchise off of the massive, colossal failure of Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly a year ago. Like, are they going to spin their way out of it and also lean on what they know? Like, probably both of those things. And so I've said all along that I don't think Ohio State has done anything wrong. And I don't think that Matt Patricia is doing anything wrong by keeping his options open. If that is a desperate franchise that paid Chip Kelly $6 million, he's well within his rights to see if that's something that they would do again for an Ohio State coordinator. I think where it gets difficult, and I don't blame you for feeling the paranoia, and I don't think that this situation is resolved, that like Matt Patricia is absolutely coming back because of that possibility that still exists in front of him. But Ohio State can't bid against nothing. I think it has already shown a commitment to make him the highest paid coordinator in the history of Ohio State football. Like that, when the first time I heard it in October, it was like maybe the highest paid coordinator in the history of college football, period. I don't know what those numbers are like right now. And I don't know that they are negotiating against themselves or negotiating down. I'm not privy to any of that information. I know that Ohio State has shown a commitment to him, and Matt Patricia is still doing the job that he is being paid to do and is still under contract to do for the Buckeyes. So to push back against that or say that there should be a higher level of concern, or that now I feel Ohio State's doing something wrong, or Matt Patricia should just lock in and take the deal. It's from like, I don't want to be hypocritical on that point, but at some point there does have to be a signature on a contract, but I don't feel like that has to be done like by February 1st.
No, I agree. I think that it's important. You bring up, you don't negotiate against yourself. That's fairly standard business practice, but it is like you can also eliminate the need for any negotiation if you just say
no. I think you're right about that. I don't disagree.
Well, good. We got there. I think sometimes that is what you do. You negotiate with yourself. You say to yourself, hey, I had 5 really good days of eating smart this week. I wasn't making poor decisions. And then you had 3 whole pizzas on Saturday and drank 14 beers. And then you say to yourself,
how did you know I did that?
Well, it's January and it was a major snowstorm. But then you wake up on Monday and you start over. That's why I like Awaken 180, because the plan works. The plan, everyone sees it. It's working for me. It worked for you. It worked for Brandon Beam. Worked for a lot of people at 97.1 The Fan. It can work for all the people listening to this too. If you go to awaken180weightloss.com, they give you a plan. They give you a really great app that tracks your food. They give you a coach that you talk to regularly. You still talk to your coach, right? It's been 2+ years since you got done with
I talked to Jen on Tuesday, as a matter of fact.
You 2 years ago, you went through the hard part of this process. I'm still getting to the end of it. I feel great. I'm sleeping better. I'm snoring less. My wife is much happier. I just feel like in general, it has been you and I talked about this over the last year. I was like, I'm interested in trying this. And then it finally got the opportunity to do it. And it has been so much easier and so much better. I feel so much healthier, stronger, making better decisions. Can't wait until I can eat a piece of cheese. I've talked about that a few times, but I know that like everything I learned from Awaken 180 during this process is going to stick with me over the next portion of my life. And I'm going to stay on the plan. And you can do the same if you go to awaken180weightloss.com. Join us there because it works. And Matt Patricia has worked for Ohio State. It has been an unequivocal success for Ryan Day. And I think that it's probably the reason why there is even more a bigger segment of the fan base that's saying, well, Arthur Smith will work too. Because like the Matt Patricia model now makes perfect sense. And that's why I just think it's important that you figure out a way to make sure he's the guy, because you don't want the last thing Ryan Day needs heading into this offseason with that schedule, with everything else, is another like blitzkrieg of a problem or a surprise coaching departure in February, 2 weeks before the spring football starts, because there's enough on the plate heading into this season that you don't want to worry about that.
January was busy enough. You don't need to ramp it up in February with another coaching search. So that lumps in the biggest concern and then the biggest carryover into February, which is 3 thoughts. The first one wasn't what we had in mind talking about the college football calendar, but it works for me. And it works to wrap it up on a 3 Thoughts Thursday on the Beat presented by the Waterworks. We will have a Freaky Friday foursome of questions from you all. You can email those in at theaustinandbermshow@gmail.com. That's theaustinandbermshow@gmail.com. Appreciate everyone who's been reaching out there. We took a bonus one last week. We got that right with Ohio State and USC being on Halloween. So sometimes we can be helpful. Sometimes we can just be silly. But either way, we appreciate you hanging out with us. We'll be looking for your questions. If you can get those in, spoiler alert, by Thursday around noon, that would be very helpful. And then we'll dive into those on the final edition of The Beat for this week, which is always on a Friday. This has been a Thursday, though. He is Berm. I am Austin. We appreciate you all. We'll talk to you tomorrow.